Top 5 Regrets of Dying People by Bronnie Ware. What was so impactful to you about that book?
So I live by this quote. I have this necklace that has a true north star on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the quote I live by is, you can't see the stars during the day. Sometimes it takes the darkness to see clearly that which you simply could not within the light.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is that after my car accident, when I was in the darkness of regret, in the darkness of my poor choices, in the darkness of not understanding what just happened, I saw 2 stars that I couldn't see during the day when things were quote unquote good.
The following is a conversation with Alan Lazaros. Alan is the CEO of Next Level University. When Alan was only 2, his father passed away in a car accident, and when he was 26, and after getting into a nearly fatal car accident himself, questioned everything he was doing in life. He questioned who he was and the choices he was making. He was at an all-time low and decided to change his trajectory forever. And although he had a successful career in corporate America, he made the hard decision to start his own business dedicated to helping others get to the next level in their lives in areas including love, health, and wealth. Here's our conversation. Alan, thanks so much for taking the time to come on the podcast.
You are so very welcome. Like I said, you had nothing but humility and gratitude, which means a lot to me. And I'm ready to rock, man.
I appreciate it. I'm doing my best these days to try and stay as humble and have humility as I can. But I'm really excited that we got a chance to make this happen, because I've actually had your other half business partner, have to make sure in that context, on the podcast, Kevin, and we had a great conversation. So we're going to put together a great episode today. And you have a really cool story and a lot of fun and interesting questions and journeys to get into, but I think I know the best place to start. So, Alan, I have a question. You've recorded over 1,600 podcast episodes. Now, when you hear the number 1,600, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
I would say one hell of a journey. One hell of a journey comes to mind.
Do you remember recording that first episode? Did you ever think you'd get all the way to 1,600?
So one thing that I think is a little bit weird about me, and this might be different than what Kevin will be an interesting act to follow, tough act to follow, I guess, in some ways, but interesting. And I adore Kevin. Kevin's a wonderful human being, and he's a strong communicator, stronger communicator than me, unless it's a group of engineers, in which case I think I'm a stronger communicator to engineers. But anyways, so did I ever think I would get to 1,600? So I did, and that's actually uncomfortable to share, because I don't usually start things unless I intend to do them forever. Now, here's the interesting thing. Just because I intended to do them forever when I started does not mean that I don't pivot.
Mm-hmm.
So a good analogy, I never really dated for anything short term.
Mm-hmm.
Every single time I was with any previous partner. So I had one 4.5-year relationship. I had one 5-year relationship in my mid-20s, and then I had one that was the same girl that I had dated in high school. So it was like 2.5 years, but we had, reconnected 10 years later. And then now I'm in, the relationship that I know is my person that I'm going to be with for the rest of my life. And I think this is a good analogy for what it's like to be an infinite thinker versus a finite thinker. So an infinite game, and there's a lot of this on game theory and that kind of stuff. And I study all that kind of constraint theory, game theory, all that cool stuff. And in game theory, there's something called an infinite game versus a finite game.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't play finite games. And so when I did start a podcast prior to teaming up with Kevin, I did intend on doing it forever. But that doesn't mean that everything I've ever done, at one point I was a semi-pro gamer and I wanted to be a pro gamer, and then I changed my mind. So the answer is a duality. Yes, I did think we'd get to 1,600 episodes. And it is a little bit surprising because I've also pivoted in the past, if that makes sense.
For sure. And I think a great analogy that came to mind, actually, and I'm not sure if you listen to this episode or not, but Lex Friedman, I'm sure you know the name, one of the biggest podcasters in the world, interesting dude. When he had Jeff Bezos on, in an episode I'm listening to right now, one of the things that Jeff Bezos said that really resonated was the sense that they have a lot of principles or tenets at Amazon, and then in parentheses they have, unless you find a better way. So I really like that dual approach right there, where you're saying, I plan to do it forever, but if there's a better way or if there's something else that I feel geared to, I'm always open to that. And I think a lot of people have trouble holding those two contrasting things in their head. But if they can, ultimately, they get to where they're supposed to go to. But really appreciate you bringing that up. And I have something to get into, and I'm happy you brought up your relationship too, because I have a fun question around that, but I'll save that a little bit for later. But speaking of Kevin, how did you guys actually meet?
All right, so Kevin and I's story is fascinating. So he and I went to we grew up in the same small town.
Mm-hmm.
We both grew up without fathers. So his father left when he was a little boy, prior to him, either right after he was born or prior to him being born. I'm not really sure, but his father left when he was very young. And my father passed away when I was 2 years old. So we both grew up without fathers. He was raised by two women, so was I. So I had an older sister and mom that raised me. And he had his mom and his Mima, so his mom and his grandmother raised him. And we grew up in the same town. Middle school, we were close friends. High school, he hated me. I didn't hate him, but I hated that he hated me. He was deeply insecure. I was probably pretty arrogant. At least that's what he says. I think I just believed in myself a lot and didn't get that not everyone does. And was probably a little bit arrogant too. I mean, who isn't in their teens, right?
Yep.
And then we reconnected in our mid-20s, and I was the first guest on his podcast. He had a podcast called the Hyperconscious Podcast. And it meant hyperconscious means to be acutely aware, change the way you think, change the way you act, change the way you live. And I was his first guest. And then he was my first guest on a podcast called Conversations Change Lives. And eventually we were like interviewing each other. We were both existentialists, which we didn't know what that meant back then, but we were both philosophers. We both loved to talk about life. What's the purpose? What's the meaning? What's the point? Contemplating who you are, who you want to be, all this kind of stuff. And that'll be clear in this episode for sure. But we didn't believe in autopilot. We just want to contemplate all the time. We have deep conversations about the weirdest stuff all the time. And we eventually teamed up, created the worst naming podcast ever of all time, which was the Conversations Change Lives meets Hyperconscious podcast. And eventually we decided to go all in on Hyperconscious. And then, I don't know, 400 or 500 episodes later, we rebranded to Next Level University. And that was almost 7 years ago. So this is our 7th year podcasting. And now we have 1,600 episodes, as you've mentioned. And it's wild, man. It's wild. So, and we actually have a production company that produces 50 shows now, and 4 of which are actually mine. Next Level University, 3 of which are mine. The Conscious Couples podcast, and then I just launched something called the Next Level Audio Blog. But, anyways, the point is, it's been a hell of a journey, and Kevin and I's roots go way back, and so we get to talk about high school stuff together, and it's, even though we didn't get along back then, it's just funny.
It's okay. You look back on those moments, and if anything, they make for great stories when you get older and a lot of stuff to laugh at. But really inspiring that you guys have been able to get all the way to 1,600 episodes. I think this is episode number 65 for me, so I'm only like 1,500 away. So one day I'll get there.
You will, my friend, if you stick with it and you keep the right perspective. I think you're going to crush it. It's just brutal. Just remember that it's every climb worth climbing is just absolutely brutal, and it doesn't mean you can't enjoy it along the way, but you're going to get kicked in the teeth a lot, and that's okay.
Yep, one step at a time for sure. And I appreciate those words of wisdom there. But another thing that I wanted to get into that you actually just brought up, so actually similar to me, my father actually also passed away when I was very young, so I can definitely relate to your and Alan's story. But growing up without a father, what do you really remember from your childhood that really stuck out?
Yeah, so great question, and I think it's important for everyone to contemplate. I always say to all my clients, make sure you're rewatching the movie of your own life. I always think of Finding Nemo because I saw Finding Nemo way back when it first came out as a kid, and then when you watch it again, it's like, oh, I didn't notice that before. Like, oh, that's an adult joke. That's not a kid joke.
Yep.
And so every single year I try to rewatch the movie of my own life. And so what stands out for me is, and this is fairly new for me, I didn't realize this until probably 33 years old. I'm 35 now, even though I look 15.
You look great for 35, by the way. Sorry to interrupt. Fantastic.
Thank you, brother. I'm hoping to hit puberty at 36. You know what I'm saying?
We'll see.
So it's actually tough because I'm a business coach, and the looking young thing is very challenging for people. But anyways, so it's like, how dare you coach me, a younger man, you know?
Okay.
But anyways, so it wasn't until my 30s that I realized I started doing therapy, and I started rewatching the movie of my life from these new lenses. And I've been doing that kind of every year, but different, because now I'm more emotionally intelligent, I'm more emotionally mature, and I'm looking at it from a different frame than I used to ever since learning a lot of the therapy side. Because I've always been very strategic, long-term thinker, computer engineer, mathematical, scientific mind. That stuff was always fairly easy for me, as arrogant as that might sound. But what wasn't easy for me was the inner stuff. I was never good at relationships. I didn't understand emotional intelligence, blah, blah, blah. So when I reflect back on my childhood, to answer your original question, what jumps off the page is two things. Number one, I was way more emotionally immature than I thought, because I think we're all ready and lefty, and we're all very strong in one. So I had high self-belief. I was an engineering thinker. I was mathematical, scientific mind. I call it STEM BIF: science, technology, engineering, mathematics, business, and finance. That stuff just always felt like super easy for me.
Natural.
And relationships just felt so hard for me. It just felt like impossible to get along with other people. I didn't understand. I now realize what I used to do is just dim my light, pretend I'm dumber than I am, don't challenge anyone or anything, and then everyone will like you. You know, be less, be less, be less. And for anyone who doesn't believe in themselves, I might trigger you. I just have a lot of self-belief. I have a lot of self-efficacy. I'm an achiever. I think aiming small isn't optimal. And I'm very driven and intense. And a lot of people can't handle that intensity. And I totally understand. And the old me just wanted to be loved. And ironically, Kevin and I now understand this. Kevin is naturally likable.
Mm-hmm.
I've never been naturally likable. I mean, if you told me, hey, you're going to go and you're going to speak in front of 1,000 people and you're going to add value to their life and get them to think differently and build a bigger future, I would say 10 out of 10, I can do that. Absolutely. If you were to say, Alan, I need you to get everyone in that room to like you, I would say that is impossible. There is no chance. There's going to be people in that room that effing hate me. And they don't even know why they hate me. They might not even be aware that they hate me. They just don't like me. I don't know why. I think it's because of high self-belief and people are deeply insecure about their lack of it. I don't know. I also think people are intimidated by intelligent people, and I have always been statistically very intelligent. So that said, what didn't I understand back then that I do now? I now understand that most of my pain is social. Getting along with other people has always been difficult. I now realize why. Computer engineering mind, and there's 4 modalities of thinking. I'll go quick with this, but I think this will be breakthroughs for you and your listeners. The first modality of thinking is the rarest, and it's math and numbers and rationality and logic. I'm hyper rational. I didn't know this, as a kid, but I've always been hyper rational. The average car payment in the U.S. is $768 per month. Canada has 37 million people. The Philippines have 110 million people. The U.S. has 338 million people. The globe just surpassed 8 billion. I'm numbers. Everything is numbers for me. I think in numbers. I feel in numbers. I work in numbers. Everything's numbers. Now, that's the rarest. And a lot of people know that engineers struggle to coexist with other people. The reason why is they're hyper rational. They're extremely logical, and most people are not. And I'm not trying to offend anyone, but it's just true. So if you walk around all day, every day, thinking everyone else is irrational, it's not that they're irrational. It's that you're super rational.
Yep.
And so Jeff Bezos, for example, very rational. Just a super rational human being, right? $1 billion company, still drives a Toyota. Most people think that's so weird. It makes perfect sense to me. I drive a Mazda. I made, a bunch of money last year. So here's my point. Engineering minds is the rarest. It's super valuable, but usually socially awkward and usually comes with low self-worth because you don't get along. You're not an easily likable person. If you're an engineer, it's very hard to be likable. Okay. Especially if you have high self-belief. 3 more modalities of thinking. I'll go quick. Words. People think in words. That's the most common. So that's Kevin. Kevin thinks in words. That's why he's a better communicator. He's an artist. He picks the titles. He's so good at thinking in words. He also raps on the side. He thinks in words. He feels in words. Most people do. And so people just resonate with him. It's wild. I'll give a speech next to him thinking mine is more valuable, and everyone likes him better. And it's like, oh my God. Truth be told, I think mine was more valuable. Of course, I would think that. I'm biased. I get it. But the truth is, he gets it to land in a way I don't, because my way of thinking is not common. Unless it's a group of engineers, which I alluded to earlier, in which case they probably resonate more with me. Two more modalities of thinking. One is energy, super rare, second rarest. I'm learning how to think in energy. I'll give you an example. When we first got on this session, you had positive, humble, and grateful energy.
I appreciate
the old
that.
me wouldn't even have noticed. I mean, genuinely, this is like fairly new. My girlfriend Emilia thinks in energy. She sees energy. She thinks in energy. It's really cool. And then the last one is pictures, thinking in images. Now, everyone's sitting there going, well, I do all of those. Every one of us does all four, but we have one that's really dominant. And mine is numbers that's really dominant. So if you have a numbers way of thinking, a rational way of thinking, a scientific way of thinking, you resonate so much with everything I'm saying. If you don't, you're intrigued. You're not sure if you like me. You're not sure if you know why. You think maybe I'm a little full of it, but you just don't understand that I'm just different than you, and that that's okay. And believe it or not, if I'm different than you, it's actually important to learn from me. And so at the end of the day, that's what I didn't understand. I didn't understand the different modalities of thinking, and I didn't understand that I was emotionally immature and that all of my pain came from being different when I didn't know why I was different or how I was different. And I'm finally starting to understand in my 30s that I'm just very, very different and very, very unique in the way I think, the way I live, and the way I act.
I'm really happy about a lot of the points that you brought up and really resonate with them. But I think the two that really stuck out in particular, one, emotional intelligence. I think when you're young, probably in your late teens, early 20s, I think looking back, there's things you would have done differently, but you acknowledge that when you're younger, it's just tougher to be emotionally intelligent and it's tougher to just comprehend a lot of things. So it's one of those things that you can always try to bestow that upon the next generation or to people who are a little younger. But then ultimately, when they make similar choices, you're like, I only understood that because I made that mistake. So a really interesting dynamic there. And regarding modalities, I'm really happy that you brought up the fourth one because I was going to say, what about like another one? Because I think on a personal note, I think when I try to think, I'm a little more probably 1 and 4 oriented than the 2 and 3, but I'm probably geared a little more toward the math side earlier on. But just recently, I'm sure you know this, running a podcast for for over 1,000 episodes. But when you're running a podcast behind the scenes, there's like a gazillion different things you have to do to get the production right, the editing, the promotion, kind of clips nowadays. But I'm always imagining in images like, okay, this is one process too. How does this process break down? So really interesting that you brought that up. And I would definitely encourage other people to try to think about it in that way, see what they're dominant in, really go with that, but also be conscious of the others, maybe work on their other modalities and also be conscious of how others work kind of or how others function so they could best work with those individuals. But really happy about a lot of the points that you brought up. But back to another point regarding your story. When you were 26, you almost got into a fatal car crash. What happened on that day?
So I already mentioned earlier in this episode that my father passed away when I was 2. I don't know if I mentioned that it was in a car accident. So he was 28 years old and he died in a car accident. And when I was 2 at the time that he passed away. When I was in my mid-20s, I was 26, I got in a car accident too that really, talk about a midlife, quarter life. I call it my quarter life crisis. And so I'm up in New Hampshire with my little cousin. We were playing Call of Duty. At this point, I was in corporate, and we weren't drinking or partying or anything like that. But we were headed to a TGI Fridays, harmless, Friday night. Wicked dark night. 2016, the snowbanks are covering the signs because the winter was so bad. This was like one of the worst winters.
Mm-hmm.
Potholes everywhere, that kind of thing.
I remember that winter.
It was bad, right? Yeah. It was a
very.
really, really tough one. So I'm in New England, so New Hampshire is just a lot of snow typically, but this winter was particularly a lot. So there was a yield sign that was covered that I didn't see. And I was on the wrong side of the road during a fork. There was a fork in the road. I ended up on the wrong side of the road. I look down at the GPS, I look up, and I see what I thought was a Mack truck. Huge bright lights right in front of my car. And I thought for sure, Mack truck, did the calculation, we are done. This is it. It's the end. And if you've never been in a life or death situation, it's awful. It's, time is super fast and super slow. It's really hard to articulate. But I thought for certain that was it. That was the end. Fortunately, it was not a Mack truck. It was a lift-kitted pickup truck. And I was driving a 2004 Volkswagen Passat. This car definitely saved my life. I used to call it the tank. So I paid off $84,000 worth of school debt in a single year. I had an investment account of all these tech companies with $150,000 in the bank. I was just making a lot of money, and I wanted to save money, and I had no kids and no bills really. So I was just saving money. And I bought this car for cash, $5,000, 2004 Volkswagen Passat. And luckily I did, because this thing was a tank. This was a steel trap, German engineered tank. And I am telling you, that car saved my life. So airbags did deploy, even though it was a 2004. Both of them did. He hurt his knee on the airbag. I hurt my face on the airbag. Physically, we were okay, though. Now, the car was absolutely totaled, completely smashed in. And I've seen the pictures of my dad's car, and I've seen the pictures of my car, and they don't look very different. As a matter of fact, in my speeches, I'll show them. Okay. And so we were physically okay, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, I was so not okay. Mm-hmm. And so he was 17 at the time. His name's Dan. And he was tweeting about it. He was sort of still in that teenage, invincible, thought nothing of it. Yep. And my dad died in a car crash. And I've heard stories my whole life about John. And so this isn't like, oh, that could have been it. It's like, listen, that really could have been it. That, I've witnessed that being it my entire life. I've never met my own father, right? So for me, I was sitting in an armchair drinking whiskey. I don't drink anymore, but I used to. And just contemplating my existence.
In that moment, after you got into that crash, and thankfully you were able to survive, as that moment is an inflection point, from that moment on, what changed for you?
Yeah, so people always ask me, do you think it's possible to have that kind of growth and transformation without a car accident? And my answer is yes and no. Everything is yes and no. Everything's a duality. And as you get older and wiser, I should just say wiser, because some people get older and not wiser. But as you get wiser, you realize everything's a duality. It's like, well, is it up or down, or is it left or right? Is it too much or too little? Everything is that. It's like, you tell me how to succeed. It's like, well, you have to work harder. It's like, no, not true. 12 hours a day, every day, 6 days a week.
It's sustainable.
It's not sustainable. You need to tell me to rest. But most people, yeah, work harder is a great advice. So everything's a duality. It's work hard and smart. You ever hear like work smarter, not harder? What a terrible piece of advice. That is just such bad advice. Here's the truth. You don't work smart until after you work hard and beat your head against the wall. You think Jeff Bezos built Amazon with, I think I'm just going to work smart. I'm not really going to work hard. No way, right? That's such crappy advice. Now, again, I'm not trying to be unkind, but I just got such bad advice growing up that it just bothers me. Here's my point. You can transform iteratively over time, but are you going to have the transformation I had with a car accident? Probably not. Mm-hmm. Unless you also go through something traumatic. There's something called post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's very real. Double yellow lines scared me. I was claustrophobic. Crowds bothered me. I had a lot to work through. Okay, I remember I used to puff my chest up and walk in and out of a doorway just to overcome my claustrophobia. Mm-hmm. But I also had post-traumatic growth. I found personal development. I found personal growth. I was successful from the outside in. I was an achiever. I had a ton of money and a beautiful girlfriend, and I had what everyone else thought was the American dream, but I was deeply unfulfilled. And I decided to flip the script, and I decided to become successful from the inside out. And rather than achieving my goals and dreams externally and hoping that fulfills me, I focus on deeply meaningful work that fulfills me, and then have achievement be a byproduct of that. And that is a very important inside out approach that I don't think a lot of people take, particularly not when you're young. When you're young, you're like, oh, I want to be significant, and I want to get the cute boy or the hot girl. And all of it is just such crap. But we don't know that yet. Mm-hmm. And you don't know it until after you have the beautiful girlfriend, and after you have the 6-figure salary, and after you're a 1% earner, and after you have everything you thought you wanted. And so, fulfillment, I think, is something we were never taught. We were never taught about. I certainly didn't understand. But after 26, I decided, you know what? that almost was it. I regret most of my choices, and that's just the truth. Now, I understand. I do. I get the duality. Like, if I didn't make those choices, then I wouldn't have gotten here, blah, blah, blah. I get it. But you could have made a different choice. I could have chosen better mentors. I could have chosen to read better books. I could have chosen to take my health seriously. I could have, and I didn't. And that's on me. And I take responsibility for my own life and my own future. It is not my fault that I grew up with alcoholism and alcoholics around me, but it is my responsibility to make a great life out of that. And at the end of the day, it requires high self-belief to take responsibility. So if anyone out there struggles with self-belief, you are like, well, yeah, easy for you to say. That's true. But you can take responsibility for your own life before having a car accident. And you should. And you will regret it if you don't, one way or another. And I found that out at my quarter life crisis. I had tons of regret. And so now I live a life, and this is the real answer. I live a life in between regret and fulfillment. Those are the two best teachers. Better than all your teachers, all your educators, all your professors, all your mentors, and all your coaches. The two best teachers on planet Earth are fulfillment and regret. Fulfillment says, hey, Alan, you are in alignment with your calling. You are maximizing your potential. You are doing the meaningful work in the world that you're meant to do, that you're suited for, that you love to do, even though it sucks. You still have meaning, and you're creating a higher and higher quality of life on a day-to-day basis. That's what fulfillment says. And when you're unfulfilled, what is it saying? It's your soul saying, you are off. You are off. You are outside of alignment with your core values. You're outside of alignment with what you're here for. You're outside of alignment with what truly fulfills you. And that's regret. Regret is an indicator. It's an emotional signal saying you have got to change course. You keep drinking and you're hungover again, and you need to stop, Alan. Now, this is not me just beating myself up, but life is serious. I grew up in an environment where everyone was saying these are the best years of your life. And I remember thinking, God, I hope not. High school sucked. It was so bad. And they are not the best years of your life. The best years of your life keep coming if you keep getting better. And I'm sorry if I'm getting intense here, but I'm telling you, the advice that you're taking from people, these people are out of shape. They're unhappy. They take better care of their car than their own family. They don't like their career, right? I got advice from people that were so unfulfilled and miserable. And I listened because I was too naive to wake up and smell the roses. And so, yeah, I had poor guides growing up. I didn't have a father. I didn't have male role models. I grew up in a small town that was small-minded. All true. But I made poor choices, and I allowed that environment to shape me instead of shaping myself and changing my environment. And fortunately, I grew up in a free country where you have choices. And I hope if you're out there watching or listening to this, that's the case for you. And if it is, you can improve your life. It's not going to get better overnight. It's not going to change overnight. But you can have a bigger, better, brighter future. And it requires you to take more responsibility for your own choices.
Thank you so much for those beautiful points there. I think life is a beautiful thing and certainly unpredictable, but it's what we make of it. And I love the phrase that you said that I don't think I've actually heard before, but think of the best days of your life. A lot of people are like, oh, high school or college. But if you have the mindset that the best days of my life are just going to keep on coming, I think that really helps you think long term and get through all those turbulent times in the short term and the medium term and whenever things aren't going that way. So I appreciate you sharing that. On a similar note, a book that you read that you said that was really instrumental in your life was called The Top 5 Regrets of Dying People by Bronnie Ware. What was so impactful to you about that book?
So I live by this quote. I have this necklace that has a true north star on it. And the quote I live by is, you can't see the stars during the day. Sometimes it takes the darkness to see clearly that which you simply could not within the light. And what I mean by that is that after my car accident, when I was in the darkness of regret, in the darkness of my poor choices, in the darkness of not understanding what just happened, I saw two stars that I couldn't see during the day when things were quote unquote good. And the two stars were, number one, Tony Robbins' TED Talk. Best TED Talk in the history of all TED Talks, in my opinion, regardless of what you think of Tony. I respect Tony. I respect his work. Don't associate me with him. But what I will say is his TED Talk is world class. Absolutely world class. Number two, normally normally I have flashcards with me that I've been carrying around in my pocket. They're all tattered.
It's
I
okay.
think I left.
Life makes you improvise sometimes. It's all
Yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah. So normally I have flashcards that are always in my pocket and or with me on my person, and they're all tattered at this point. But one of the flashcards that I have in my pocket, typically, is from the Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying is a book by Bronnie Ware. She's an Australian woman who worked in hospice for 8 years, and she worked with the terminally ill. These are people who were told they were going to die. And she thought her job was to take care of them. What her real job was, she articulates in the book, it was to listen. And she noticed after 8 years working in hospice with the terminally ill that they all had the same regrets. They all said the same, I wish, I wish, I wish. And so she created a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. And I've since actually interviewed Bronnie, which is really cool. But the number one regret of the dying spoke to me so deeply. I wish I had lived a life true to myself and not what others expected of me. And again, I didn't know any of this at the time, but I was doing so much of what I was doing back before my car accident for approval and validation. You know, I wanted my stepdad's attention. I wanted my mom's attention. I wanted approval. I wanted my friends' approval. And ironically, and this is the hard truth, I don't really have most of their approval now.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my friends back then, they don't like me. They don't like who I've become. They're not into personal growth or personal development. They probably think I'm full of it. And I don't really get along with many of them anymore. And I think some of them probably are still kind or whatever. But at the end of the day, the truth is, I used to do a lot of what I was doing unconsciously to be loved, to be approved of. And after 26, I was like, nope, I'm not doing that ever again.
Mm-hmm.
I can't live my life trying to get approval. I already told you how hard it is for me to be a likable person. I can't spend my life trying to be liked because I just have never been easily likable.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm deeply unfulfilled when I'm not myself. Even this episode, like, think about how intense I am, right? Talk about calling people out. You deserve to take responsibility for your own life. And, you know, no matter how hard your past has been, you know, you have a spotless future if you make new choices. It's like, who is this guy and who does he think he is? That might be what you're saying. That might be true. But I have to say it because it's what's in me and it's what I'm here to do. And so Bronnie Ware's work, it was so cool to interview her because it was like 4 years later. But Bronnie Ware's work is, listen, these are the things that people regret at the end. Try to live a life that at the end you don't have any regrets. And I think that it's a duality. I think we're all going to have regrets at the end. But I'll tell you what, I'm going to have a hell of a lot less now than back then.
Yeah.
Because I flipped the script and I decided to finally express my truth. I decided to finally call people out every now and then.
Mm-hmm.
One tiny example and then we'll move on. There's this person in my life who her whole life she'd say, well, I'm overweight because I quit smoking. I'm overweight because I quit smoking. After people quit smoking, they struggle to lose weight, apparently, or they gain weight or whatever. I said, you know what? That's not true. I said, aren't there people who have quit smoking that aren't overweight? And she's like, yeah. And I said, the truth is, I was a fitness coach, fitness competitor, fitness model, 41 photo shoots, right? It's like, the truth is, and we all know it, the truth is you are not in shape because you've never consistently exercised in your entire life. Now, you don't like the truth. You don't have to hate me. Just don't like the truth if you want. But here's the thing. I was put on this planet to help people see more truth, to help them see themselves and the world more accurately. That is what this podcast is about. Underneath this, it's helping you see yourself more accurately, helping you see the world more accurately, helping you see how things work and why they work that way more accurately. I think of it as self-awareness, seeing yourself accurately, how you work and why you work that way. Human awareness, meaning other people. How do humans work? Why do they work that way? Psychology, neuroscience, physiology. How do they work? Why does it work that way? Why do we need to drink 80 ounces a day, or depending on how much you weigh, like that kind of thing? Why, how? And then lastly, the world. How does the world work? How does technology work? How does the internet work? Why does it work that way? You know, why does the economy always boom and bust? Why is the US the biggest economy on the planet compared to the other countries?
Mhm.
Right? And by how much? Right? And what created that? Is it the Constitution? Is it blah, blah, blah? Is it free capitalism? Is it the people? Is it the resources within the country? So the who, how, what, when, where, why. And the only wrong answer, and this is my long-winded but like golden nugget at the end here, the only wrong answer is to not ask these questions. I don't have all the answers. Hell no. Oh my God, I don't have all the answers. But I'll tell you what, I ask the questions every single day. And because of that, I have more answers than most. And the people in high school saying these are the best years of your life, no, sir. Those were the best years of your life. Because you hate your career and you're miserable and you drink every day and you don't take care of your family and you're divorced and your wife hates you. You want to know why? Because you're arrogant. You're arrogant and you don't have the humility to say, you know what? I kind of suck and I'm going to go get better. I'm going to try to be better. I'm emotionally immature and I'm still living the glory days of when I was awesome in high school and how high school were the best years of my life. And I'm going to let that phoenix and my ego burn to the ground. And I'm going to say, you know what? I'm going to build from the ground up. I'm going to be a better person. I'm going to be emotionally mature and I'm going to try to get better every day. And so at the end of the day, that's my soliloquy.
I appreciate you sharing that soliloquy and beautiful words to share there for sure. Life is definitely really hard and people go through unspeakable circumstances. I'll leave it at that. But it's incredible how, I don't want to say incredible, but interesting how a lot of people have those challenges when they're thinking about changing their lives. When, if you really think about it, it's just a choice. I mean, simple as that. It's just, a choice and then another choice and a series of choices. And ultimately those compound. So really interesting to hear that dynamic and cool to see how you're able to make that work and give that advice and beautiful work that you're doing. But speaking of that work, you made a really big choice in, the middle of your life. Well, I don't say the middle of your life, but early on in your career, we'll put it that way, to jump from corporate America to kind of go all in on Next Level University. What was going through your head when you made that jump?
When you transform on the inside, there's certain things on the outside that no longer resonate. So I transformed from the inside out after that car accident. And after that, it was so hard for me to stay doing the same work I used to do. So I used to sell industrial automation equipment into manufacturing facilities. I worked for a company called Cognex, and I was an inside sales engineer, and then I got promoted to outside sales, and I traveled all around Western New England. So Vermont, Western Mass, and Connecticut was my territory. And I did really well, and I was traveling all the time, and I was just downloading books into my consciousness. Like every time I traveled, I was just listening to all these self-improvement books. I became obsessed with self-improvement and personal growth. And the more and more I grew inside, the less and less aligned the people, places, things, and ideas around me were.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really what happens, right? I mean, even after this episode, if you're out there watching or listening to this, after this episode, you're going to be a little different. Just a little. And when you're a little different inside, you're going to go outside, and the person's, places, things, and ideas that you pick up on, that you notice, that you align with are going to change. So when you grow inside, everything around you on the outside kind of has to change too. And so corporate was no longer aligned. And this is really the reason why. I was unfulfilled in my work, not because it wasn't a great company, not because it wasn't super profitable.
Mm-hmm.
I was unaligned in my work because I went into a manufacturing facility one time, and that's what we did. We sold into manufacturing facilities. And there's this one factory in particular that I would see the legacy on the walls, all these pictures of the factory back in the day. And back in the day, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, this had thousands of workers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then now, keep in mind, this is back in probably, 2013, 2014, 2015. It's just one floor manager and all robots.
Sign of the times.
Now, whether you agree with robotics or AI or not, whether you agree with technology or not, whether or not you like the kiosks, self-checkout or not, they're all coming, and there's nothing any of us can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
Businesses are going to automate because it's cheaper and robots don't get sick. It is what it is, and it's going to happen with or without me. But there was a facility where there was these people checking the products at the end of the line. 4 individuals checking, and I'll never forget. I was dressed to the nines, and I was making tons of money, and I was selling equipment that would literally take their jobs. We sold machine vision equipment that would check for the people, check the bottle, make sure the cap's on right, quick snap images, software that would quality assurance. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this moment with myself of, oh my goodness, those people who need that job are losing their job, and I'm making money, like a lot of money on the commission of these products. And I had this moment, and again, I'm a math thinker, so forgive me. Statistically speaking, I think in statistics, the less educated population tends to have more children sooner. It's just a statistic, so don't hate me, okay? But just hear me out. So if a less educated family, I grew up in a very non-educated family, have more kids and sooner, and people like Emilia and I, for example, she's very well educated. I'm very fortunate to have a great education. We're going to have only 2 children, and I'm 35. We're waiting. So if you think about the math of this, what if one family has 5 kids, and those 5 kids have 5 kids, and those 5 kids have 5 kids, and those 5 kids have 5 kids? And what if they're socioeconomically on the lower end of education? So think about the curve of the less educated population increasing exponentially over time. But the automation is also increasing exponentially over time and taking the very jobs that those people need. I saw the curves in my mind, and I was like, we are in so much trouble. The people who need... I was at McDonald's once, and it came on a kiosk. The food came to me in the drive-thru on a conveyor belt. The people who are less educated need those jobs, and those jobs are being automated exponentially fast. And I decided I can't be a part of that. So what I did instead is I created a company called Alan Lazaros LLC, and it was what you'll never learn in school. What did you say?
I was like, creative naming.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, super creative at naming. Alan Lazaros LLC. What you'll never learn in school, but desperately need to know. And desperately was in all caps. And that was my tagline. And my goal was to get into high schools and colleges and bring self-improvement. And instead of taking jobs, I decided I want to help people reimagine their future and create jobs. And so that was my main focal point. And to this day, that's what Next Level University is all about. It's if you get better and smarter, stronger and smarter and more effective, you can create a bigger, better, brighter future. And when that happens, you'll be more fulfilled and more educated and more intelligent, and you'll make better choices. And that's how this world is going to change. And I just felt like before I was a part of the problem. If you're not a part of the solution, you are a part of the problem. And that's my truth. I used to pull my punches on that, but I don't anymore. I was a part of the problem. Now I'm a part of the solution. And now I can sleep at night knowing that I'm doing all I can with all I have to help this world become a better place.
I think beautiful story there, and really appreciate you sharing. I think in my head, how I'd summarize it, instead of profiting off of others' loss, you're making money, adding value to other people. And I think it's a beautiful thing and something we can all hope to accomplish. And you've certainly done a lot. And Next Level University is a great company, and you and Kevin are both awesome individuals. But just to get into a few of the parting notes here, I'm really happy that you brought up Amelia earlier. You guys actually run a podcast called Conscious Couples Podcast. What do you hope listeners will take away from that?
Yeah, so it's so fascinating. Again, I speak in statistics and I think in statistics, so forgive me for those who don't, but hopefully you'll get something from this. So statistically speaking, the divorce rate is very, very, very high. I think it's probably like 60 plus. And statistically speaking, only a very small amount of businesses succeed over the long term. And so I decided to do those two together. So it's been the greatest, most meaningful work I've ever done in my entire life. But it's also been the most challenging, because everyone out there, think about your intimate relationship and think about the challenges that come with that. Now start a company with that person, right? So it's been challenging, but it's been unbelievable. And you want to talk about growth. I mean, she is the most wonderful human being I've ever met in my entire life. It's not even close. She is my greatest gift, hands down. And the Conscious Couples podcast, what I hope people take from it is you can flourish in your relationship if you do the work. And by do the work, what I mean is stay humble, stay courageous, stay vulnerable, have the tough conversations, be willing to go to therapy, be willing to get a coach, be willing to read the books, be willing to understand John Gottman's bid system and how relationships work and effective communication and building trust. And we use the Jenga tower. Most people in relationships, myself included in the past, were taking Jenga blocks out and wondering why the whole thing falls.
Mm-hmm.
And the Conscious Couples podcast is putting those blocks back. And that's what every episode's about. Every episode is, listen, how do you flourish in your intimate relationship? How do you flourish in your intimate relationship? Why do certain relationships flourish and other ones don't? And so we live these trains, NLU, the We, which is the name of our other business, the Conscious Couples podcast, and she has another company called Evolve Ventures Tech. We're living, breathing existentialists that are asking a constant question, like, what makes the difference in people's lives? Why do some people start at the very bottom, beaten, abused? I mean, I had such a bad childhood. I used to be bashful about that. I mean, it was so bad. Some of it was good. But honestly, statistically, it was bad. Now, how did I do it? How is that possible? And again, it's not about me. Some people have these magnificent lives with these awful starts. Mm-hmm. And other people have these great starts that are like, super abundant. I can think of one of my exes, just this wonderful start, but she is just super lazy. She's not really going to achieve very much. She's really unfulfilled and doesn't know why, and I just figured, what makes the difference? Contemplating happiness, contemplating fulfillment, contemplating virtue, contemplating good choices versus negative choices, contemplating construction versus destruction, contemplating emotional intelligence, contemplating intellect, contemplating rationality, contemplating how the world works and why it works that way. And so the Conscious Couples podcast is to help people flourish in their intimate relationship. Next Level University is to help people improve themselves and have a bigger future. And every single day, my hope, I wake up in the morning and I hope that at the end of the day, I had no guidance growing up that I needed. I think some people tried to guide. I had a couple of really good teachers and professors, but I coach an 18-year-old. His name's Calvin. And I say, I was a mess when I was your age. He's learning from me hour-long sessions every other week. We have him tracking habits. He tracks like 24 habits a day.
It's crazy.
Dude is a sicko. He's 18. His future is so bright. Mm-hmm. I would have done anything to have found someone willing to pour into me and guide me. And he's actually, ironically, in many ways, more intelligent and more emotionally mature than most people that I know in their 40s. And he has the humility to actually have a coach. And I think we just need more of that in the world. So anyways.
I think that those are beautiful points, and it's incredible that you're able to be a mentor and beautiful purposes with both, the NLU podcast and what you have with Amelia, and really appreciate you sharing all this incredible advice. But on a parting note here, after everything you've lived, and after everything you've been through, and even knowing that your best days are going to keep coming, this thing called life at one point or another comes to an end. So when you're on your deathbed, what do you want your parting thought to be before you leave?
That I did all I could with all I had. That I maximized my potential, that I maximized my contribution, and that I maximized my quality of life. But really what it comes down to is, did I do all I could with all I had? And can I honestly say yes to that?
I hope I can.
In the past, I definitely couldn't. When I got in my car accident, there's no way I could say yes to that and look at myself in the mirror. No way. And now definitely. I mean, you can see it in my expression, right? Mm-hmm. So now that doesn't mean I'm perfect. That doesn't mean I don't still mess up constantly. As a matter of fact, ironically, I think I mess up more than I used to just because I'm trying more stuff. But yeah, if I can honestly say I made every day, every dollar, and every second, every piece of time, effort, and money count, and I did that for the betterment of all of us, I feel like I can for sure be fulfilled.
I hope I can have a similar thought when I get to that point. But Alan, it's been an absolute blast, and thanks so much for taking the time to come on the podcast.
You are so incredibly welcome. This was incredible. I feel very, very seen. I feel very grateful to have been a part of it, and I hope that this stirred something inside everyone who watched or listened, because at the end of the day, it took a lot of courage to say some of the stuff that I said, and there's no way that the 32-year-old version of me could have shared a lot of that. So I'm still on this journey too. I'm far from perfect, and I hope that everyone shoots for a bigger, better, brighter future and focuses on fulfillment, because at the end of the day, fulfilled people don't hurt people. Fulfilled people aren't on the internet trying to spread hate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're fulfilled, you just want good for other people. And I think that that's the focus. So focus on fulfillment. And thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Alan Lazaros. If you enjoyed the episode, rate the show on Spotify, drop a comment on YouTube, and subscribe.